Hey, Andrew.
Aloha. Aloha, David Still. How you
Uh,
doing?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
Great. Okay, so you have an Australian accent, but you're in Hawaii. Okay, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. You did present at TOLEX conference, right?
Yeah, I did.
Yes, I remember your presentation pretty well. I think I'll give you the opportunity in this interview. We got a full 2 hours to go. You can regurgitate everything in that magnificent presentation and then some. Well, first of all, before we do that, by all means, introduce yourself, give your life story, what you experienced. Please try to keep it educational because this is Nature of Reality Radio. We got to expose the nature of reality, and I'm giving you the chance to act as a primary source to tell your life experiences for the sake of exposing the nature of reality. Don't put people to sleep. Keep it fun and educational. I have no doubt you can because you certainly had me awake and interested in your talk during TOLEX conference. Also give out your contact info if you like. You got the floor. Who's David Still? What does he do? What did he experience?
Who is David Still? Andrew, that question can be answered on a number of levels. Firstly, I am another yourself. Um, I'm Arcturian soul essence. I'm human that you're talking to now, and I'm Australian. I'm 55-year-old Australian, father of four, married, um, former investment banker and lawyer. And since the towers came down, I went on a different path and basically stopped being employed and spent time raising my children with my wife. And I've just had an amazing journey where, as you saw in Sedona, that as I explained, teachers have kept appearing into my life as I needed to learn. And so I've just had this steady stream of people appearing with the lessons I've needed. And, eventually I realized that we live in a completely upside down world. And, we really need to change that for the sake of humanity and particularly for the sake of our young ones to give them hope for the future.
No question about it. By the way, on your Facebook page, is that Chief Golden Light Eagle you're posing next to, or someone that looks like him?
No, it's Chief Golden Light Eagle.
Oh, it's
Uh,
very fitting that I'm talking to you right now, and you have a picture of him on Facebook because I'm going to be at his conference this weekend in the Southern California area over 11/11. Looking forward to that very, very much, and also the Dolphin Watch that's going to be on Sunday after the conference. Uh, so, uh, so what made you decide to put him in your Facebook avatar? What is it about him that you see that's so appealing, worthy of giving him prominence in your own Facebook page?
um, I didn't really think about it that much, to be honest. I just thought it was a good photo, and in particular, we were standing under a sign we didn't realize that said "We are family," and I just thought that that was, a really cool synchronicity. And I don't. I had another photo of myself that was getting a few years old, so I just replaced it.
Yeah.
I love his energy. I loved his presentation, his presence, his wisdom, his humor. Yeah, anyone who's thinking about going to the event this weekend, I'd strongly recommend it. He's got a great presence. He's really really wonderful man.
Yeah, there's another Native American that kind of dresses like him that I thought might have been him. That's kind of a not a very clear picture there, but yeah, there's going to be a few Native Americans there. It's going to be an awesome conference. Laura Eisenhower too. It seems like I run into her all the time. But anyhow, you have a website that's up. Just thought I'd let you know first and foremost. There is, I'm sure you knew about this. The Connect with Us on Facebook link on that evolvesmart.com website doesn't work if you had a page there. So maybe something you might want to check out at some point. But well, actually, before we talk about all these things that pertains to this Evolve Smart multifaceted consulting and investment website, I think it might as well give you the opportunity right now because we gotta fill up 2 hours here. Why don't you regurgitate everything that you can remember to the best of your ability that you said in your presentation at Tolex conference? I know there's this is audio only. I don't really hope it's not really much of a problem. Not that there was much that you really need visuals to explain here, but It was very enlightening, very interesting, and there were a few things there that I kind of caught my interest that I think I want to elaborate on. So I'll have my pen and paper nearby if I hear you say anything that I think is worth jotting down to elaborate on. So why don't you regurgitate everything in that presentation?
Yeah, sure. Okay, just bear with me a second. I'll just get a copy of it. It's um it's been a while since then. Seems like a lifetime actually, and especially at the moment, Andrew, because I've been participating in a gathering of indigenous elders. I've been helping out with the gathering because it has such a strong resonance with my book series, and so I'm a little bit right-brained at the moment. Um, but anyway, just
Don't you mean a
uh,
little bit left-brained, or do you
no,
really
no,
a little bit
no, right.
right-brained?
Yeah, I'm not in my left logical brain. I'm in my right.
Well, some might say that's a good thing because we got to get away from the left brain. Well, not so much get away with it, but balance out the two hemispheres to the point where neither side is dominant, but the left side's been dominant a little too much. So, I mean,
It's a very good thing, but it's gone so far this week. It's yeah, I'm feeling like almost in a different
well,
dimension.
11 and 11 is coming. So, what do you expect? So,
Yeah,
go right ahead.
exactly, exactly. So just to give you give the listeners the background, Andrew, I was asked at that conference to tell my story and just the story of my journey and the teachers appearing, and yeah, so I worked. I see now that my business career was um, fast tracked. I was a partner in a law firm at age 26, and which is very young for it to be a partner in a large law firm in Australia. And then after a few years of that, I realised I was selling hours, so I was invited to go into investment banking, and I did that. I did extremely well, and I was with an Australian bank. Then I joined Merrill Lynch and travelled the world a great deal, and then did some really big deals. And then Goldman Sachs came along and made me an offer I couldn't refuse. So I joined Goldman, and as I say, at the time it was a fun, very very demanding, but a fun career. And looking back on that, I really see that again I was very fast tracked and protected. So I think there was a purpose in my career in having that experience, but then moving on to a deeper experience of connecting with nature. So what happened in my case, I gave up working, and as I said, my wife Kelly and we took our kids around Australia in a caravan, which was wonderful. We had 3 or 4 really blissful years, and then as the kids got older, I just noticed that the way that the system was, a lot of their peers, had a lot of problems. There was a very high suicide rate in our area, and even though I live on the Gold Coast of Australia, it's one of the nicest places you could ever imagine to live, and I just realised that they were disconnected from nature. And what happened in my case, I had a very tumultuous situation where suddenly, at the start of 2008, even though I'd taken all my money out of the stock market in 2007, I saw the crash coming. I decided I was going to save the world, and I was investing in all these healing centers and doing all these things to, help humanity. And on the basis that, I'm trying to help the universe, so I'll be protected. And surely enough, within one tumultuous week, everything came crashing down. And a friend of mine mentioned that um, there was a chap who just arrived in Australia who was a very good astrologer. And I decided to, I'll go and test out this astrology stuff. I'll go and get a reading. And when I sat down, he had my details, of course, and he prepared my chart. I sat down. The very first thing he said to me was, "You're being crucified." And I just looked at him and said, "What?" And he sort of explained to me it was to do with Pluto, the destroyer and the rebuilder and so forth. So basically, everything that wasn't authentic was being taken away, and a new form of authenticity was being created. Now, this guy was a guy called Jonathan Quinton. He's an incredible sacred geometry uh, artist, And his website, by the way, is Sacred Geometry for You, just the number four and the u.com. And anyway, he something happened in that reading, and I just had this deep soul recognition of him and he of I. So I invited him to come and live with us. So next minute I'm on the phone to my wife, hey, I've just invited this dude to come and live with us. And he ended up living with us for about 5 years, on and off. And we sort of established that we had a past life connection. And I was in a really wonderful situation because as I was in the process of losing my financial assets, I had this world expert teaching me sacred geometry and universal order. So, and that's information that you could be killed over in ancient times. And so I was getting that information and I was learning so much. And also, he taught me a lot of other things. When I went to see him present for the very first time, we set up the presentation, and then, I was really interested to see what he'd present because in my eyes, he was a real rock star. He had so much knowledge. He stood up to the podium and he looked at the audience, and the first thing he said was, "I have sex daily." And I just laughed, I didn't know what he was saying. And then he looked back down and he said, "Oh, I have dyslexia." So his point was that as someone with dyslexia, often the letters on the page would rearrange themselves in the way that the word dyslexia can also be arranged into "I have sex daily." And he had been told all through his schooling that he was basically stupid, and he was dumb, he was worthless. And that really opened my eyes to the way that we measure intelligence in our Western society, how limited it is. I happen to be a person who doesn't have dyslexia and can memorize things and regurgitate them like a robot, but that certainly doesn't make me intelligent. So Jonathan really opened my eyes, and I began to see the same thing with my children and their peers. I saw, a number of kids who had a special talent. One girl in our area was an animal whisperer, and yet she could not become a veterinarian because she couldn't get the mathematics score. So, I knew something was terribly wrong with the system. And when 2012 came, my children were coming home from school telling me, "Hey, Dad, the world's going to end." And, I looked into it. I looked into the Mayan calendar. I was particularly impressed, by the way, with when the writing of John Callanan suggested that the crash of the financial market would be in late 2007 or early 2008. So they predicted the crash, which was pretty impressive to me. And then I realized it was a great evolutionary opportunity because, it was an opportunity to move from the world of matter into the world of energy. And as much as I tried to tell this to people, people just laughed at me, and they preferred to focus on the end of the world. And even my own kids, I bought this spiritual movie about 2012 showing the elders and from around the world talking about it. And my kids actually refused to watch it once they found out that it wasn't the Hollywood movie that had Woody Harrelson in it, because they were, I guess, more into, zombie apocalypse and all that sort of thing. And when I told them that the apocalypse meant the lifting of the veils, they said, "Dad, go and take your medicine and see you later." So I decided I was going to write a book series, and that's really what inspired me. And ever since then, since I put that intention out of writing a fiction story, because it's a bit like Harry Potter in a way, they like the characters, they like the plot, so they read the story and, take a download of the other things about the way magic's presented in that story. I'm not saying that's real, but it's just an example. So in my case, I created a group of fictional Australian teenagers, And the idea was to track them over the next, 20 or 30 years as they woke up to the fact that everything is energy and that we're all connected. And, just each went on their own hero's journey and how that may play out in terms of how the world might look in the future. Because I thought that, people might need some sort of a blueprint to see. And yeah, it's been a really amazing process. One of the other teachers who appeared for me was Nassim Haramein, and he and I established a really good connection. And I saw basically the way that his science matched what the indigenous people were saying, and his amazing work, his amazing unified physics, basically said that you know, every proton contains all of the information in the universe. So it really is the case that external to ourselves is limited, but by our senses, but going within is completely unlimited. And that sort of unlocks the door for the substantiation, if you like, of things like remote viewing and distance healing and telepathy. And I'm in an interesting position because I'm kind of a bridge between the two worlds. I definitely believe, but I know that some people like to see the science, and also that the science is useful, of course, for creating new technologies and so on. So it's really interesting the way science now is paralleling what the ancient sages have said. And it was interesting when Nassim was in Australia, we were hanging out, just checking out the waves, and he has this amazing aura. People always want to come up and start talking to him. And a guy that I knew, he was an older guy, quite a spiritual guy. He came up, and we were making small talk about the waves, where to go surfing and so forth. But I could see that he wanted to know who is this guy, David? Who is your friend? So I started to tell him a little bit about Nassim's work. I said, this guy he's done the maths and the physics to show that we are all one, we are all connected. And he has, it's his life's work. He spent the last 30 years, but, he's finally done it. He's finally proven this, that we are all one. And anyway, this chap, his name was Glenn, he looked around at Nassim and said, you should have just asked me, dude. I would have told you. And it's quite funny because that's true. A lot of people say we don't need the proof, we believe, but we're really on this kind of event horizon where we have the divine interfacing with the 3D, and many people do need the proof. So it's very, very valid to both have the science and also just have the belief. So that was really interesting. Feel free to cut in at any time, by the way. As I was writing my book, some really other interesting, amazing teachers appeared. I went and stayed up in this. I rented this little cottage up in the mountains, and the landlord was this 70-year-old lady, and she came into me and she said, "Well, why did what are you doing?" And I said, "Look, I'm writing a book." And I told her about my book, and she said, "So it's a spiritual book?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess." And she got really excited. Her name is Ashtara. She was really excited, and because that was the day that Saturn, uh, I guess I can't remember now, but I think it was Saturn had gone into Scorpio or something like that. And she seemed to think that was very, very significant. So she got my details. She looked at my astrology chart. She saw that the two of us had this incredible connection through what she called our part of fortune in each of our charts. And she decided that she would teach me astrology for free while I was there, and also give me some great wisdom. And she told me things like, go outside every day. She said, your mind is so busy. Go outside every day and hug a tree and put your forehead against the tree and ask the tree to take away your mental chatter. And I don't know, Andrew, you might remember I said that at Sedona, and some of the people
Yes, and I
present.
asked you about it, and I said I think I'm going to start doing that more often because I hug trees, but I never ask them take away my mental chatter, and I've actually been doing that regularly whenever I hug trees, and I think I like the results. So there's definitely something to that. Could you perhaps explain the science behind that before you carry on with your talk here?
I'm not sure I can explain the
Oh,
science
okay,
behind that one, but I
but it
but I tell
works.
you what, here on Kauai at the moment, we'll talk about more about that later. My mental chatter is definitely gone. I can assure you. And I've had a few people from the conference tell me that they've done that and they do that regularly now, and it really does work. Now it's interesting in Australia. Just diverging for a minute, if somebody it's kind of an insult to call somebody a tree hugger. You know, it's like a hippie or a tree hugger. And yet, hugging a tree is just one of the most wonderful things you can do, provided you pick one that doesn't have spikes and so forth. And it's really led to me to have a really deep connection with the trees. And I realize that often the things our society says are exactly the opposite of what people should do. Another example is when I was in school, one of the biggest insults people could say to you is, you love yourself. You know, oh, you love yourself. So it's like, that's an insult, like as if you're egotistical, I guess. But of course, loving yourself is the key to everything. So again, no wonder my generation is so messed up. Um, so anyway, I continued to have these connections, and I wrote the first book in the series, and I released it, and got really great feedback, particularly from the young ones. And then Foster Gamble suddenly appeared into my life. He came to my house in Australia, and he sat down with the local teenagers, and I just watched him for about 4 hours answer their questions, and it was just amazing. I mean, I have so much respect for Foster, and he's such a genuine, wonderful man, and that gathering was really wonderful. Then I was writing this. I mean, I was pretty pleased with the first book, but then people said, "Well, where's the next one?" So that's one of the problems with writing a trilogy. You've got to, write the other two. So anyway, I spent that was 2012. Then by 2014, I was refining the the second book in the trilogy on the beautiful island of Kauai. And I went to this gathering. I've always been very impressed with Findhorn, and I went to this gathering of people who communicate with nature spirits. And I had a look at the gathering, the agenda, and I saw that there was a man who had come over. He was an Alaskan elder, and his name kind of was flashing at me, as happens. So I went along to this gathering, and for various reasons, I was quite late. Now, as I was walking into the gathering, I virtually bumped into this man, and he looked like a sort of a 60-year-old, Eskimo kind of guy, and I said to him, "Excuse me, are you the man from Alaska?" And he just looked at me and said, "Yes." And he's a very gentle, very humble, softly spoken man with a beautiful energy. And I said to him, "My name's David Steele, and I'm writing this book series about bringing the ancient wisdom to the modern youth." And he looked at me and he said, "My name is Ilarion, and that means bringing the ancient wisdom to the modern youth." So we looked at each other and sort of had this, deep recognition. And I think I gave him a big hug and invited him to come along to Nassim's Resonance project where I was staying at the time. And he sat there for hours, just like Foster Gamble had done, and he just entertained us with his wisdom that, it just blew our minds. And he was saying, you young people have your internet and we have our internet. And he's a lovely, lovely man. And I fictionalized him as a character in book 2 of the series. And so as if one of the teenagers had that experience. But then when you click on the QR code in that chapter, you get to see that Ilarion is in fact a real person. He's an Unangan elder with an incredible story, and a story that our youth need to hear. So that was just an example of, the amazing kinds of synchronicities that happen. And speaking of synchronicities, Andrew, just diverting to the present day, um, book 2 in my series is called The Gathering, and it is dedicated to the indigenous elders around the world. And now, this past week, I have been on Kauai, involved in a gathering of indigenous elders from around the world, which includes Ilarion. And so that it's kind of, to me, quite an amazing synchronicity, or obviously someone's helping me, someone up there's, helping me with this writing process. I'd just like to quickly read the dedication from that book, if I may. It's very short, but I think it gives you a bit of an idea of where I'm coming from.
Not a problem.
Yep. This book is dedicated to the indigenous elders around the world who are holding the space for humanity to transition to a heart-based reality of abundance, joy, and cooperation. Oh, what must they think of our so-called civilized ways? Holding this space without judgment is crucial for the transition, as people are now awakening to this heart-based way of life and gathering together to create it in so many ways. Thanks also to the corporate bosses who have literally made it impossible for people not to awaken. Every bit helps. So, as you can imagine, we're at a gathering of indigenous elders on Kauai. When I read that dedication the other day, people were kind of, scratching their heads. But of course, the elders weren't, because they know that everything's perfect and everything's guided by spirit. So to me, that was a really amazing, thing. And anyway, I continued on my journey. Writing book 3, the third book in the trilogy, was a little bit more difficult for a number of reasons. Firstly, because it goes quite a way into the future. And secondly, because unlike the first 2 books, you can't just end the book with some sort of, cliffhanger like a Who Shot JR type thing from the old days. But you have to complete the heroes' journeys of the characters, and also, of course, show how the solutions to our current problems, might look in the actual, as implemented. So that has taken me the past 2.5 to 3 years. It's been it's been wonderful, but it's been very challenging. And that process, finally, recently, I was staying in the US, as you know, when I was going to Sedona. I hadn't been back in contact with Foster Gamble, but I had a book editor, and she contacted me after she had to firstly read the first 2 books, and in order to edit the third book. And firstly, she contacted me and said she was halving her rate because it wasn't actually work to do this project. So I was quite pleased with that. But secondly, she became extremely excited about the movie Thrive, What on Earth Will It Take? Foster and Kimberly's movie. So she sent me this email, how she'd sent it to all of her list, and, she was super excited and so forth. So I forwarded that to Foster, and it just happened to have a copy of book 3 attached to it. And anyway, a couple of days later, Foster contacted me and said, "Can you come straight to my house? I'm going overseas in a couple of days, but please, can you come to my house tomorrow?" And so I said, "Of course." And anyway, I went to Foster's house, and he'd printed out the book. He'd written a list of things he really loved about the book, which, there was no reason for him to do that. I mean, it's just a wonderful thing to do. And he'd also marked some typos and some other editing stuff. So he basically edited the book for free, and told me he couldn't help himself because he was an English major. And he also looked at me and he said, "David, there's no way you did this on your own," which when I was working at Goldman Sachs, that would have been a problem. But of course, in the spiritual world, that's a compliment. In other words, he was saying it was channeled to me. So, yeah, I just basically the synchronicities and the experiences that I needed have just kept on keeping on. And another example of this, I was in California early 2016 for a board meeting for Nassim Haramain's Resonance Project. And we were staying at this property, and, the directors were there, and there were a lot of other people who were helping us out in many ways. I didn't really know who was who. I'd just flown in from Australia. And I started talking to this particular lady who was actually the owner of the property. Now, normally when you meet someone, you might start talking about the weather, or, your trip from Australia, or what a wonderful property this is. I actually said to her, I'd really like to connect with the energies of Damanhur. And that's a pretty weird conversation starter. And Damanhur is actually, a community in Italy that is not unlike Findhorn, from what I understood. So, I knew about Findhorn. I didn't know that much about Damanhur. And this lady just looked at me and said, "Really?" And her face just lit up. And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, come with me." And so I grabbed Nassim and his partner, and we went to this room which had probably about 20 artworks by Falco, who was, one of the pioneers of the Damanhur community. And we had this meditation. It was basically like a portal to Damanhur, or to the Damanhur energies. And so we were sitting there, and we took the pictures off the wall and passed them around. And Nassim's partner, she could speak Italian, so she read the inscriptions. And we just had this amazing energy transmission and download, and really got a really deep understanding that this guy had actually, Falco, this being, had actually come from the future to create this amazing place. And yeah, they dug for something like 20 years in secret, created this underground amazing place. And yeah, it just was a really, really wonderful, wonderful experience. And that experience only really happened because I had used that conversation starter of wanting to connect with Damanhur. So I'm quite in awe of the way this whole process has been unfolding for me. And in a way, Andrew, my biggest challenge is to get out of the way and just, allow it to happen without getting too attached to things the way that humans tend to do. And recently I had a situation where a wonderful lady from Colorado, who now lives in Colorado, her name is Karen Elkins, and she has a magazine called Science to Sage. And I don't know if you know of her, but certainly I would recommend her work. It's really an amazing magazine. So I had met her at a energy conference in Idaho, and she phoned me up and said, "David, I'm having these downloads about that your book needs to be a television series." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Yeah, look, they're really powerful. The other day I had to just go and lie down." And I said, "Oh, wow, thank you. That's amazing." So I spoke to my friend at the property I was staying at and told him about, we talked about a television series, and I'd know nothing about making television series. And for example, would we make it in Australia, or would we have to make it in America, because the way most Australians speak is often difficult for Americans to understand. And so anyway, we thought about that. The next day, my friend rescued somebody's dog. So it's just a totally random thing. They were at a wine tasting, and one particular gentleman's phone started beeping, and he said, oh no, my dog's escaped. And he didn't have his car. So my friend said, a very kind man said, "Look, I will take you to rescue your dog." So off they went, and they spent an hour together. They found the dog, they rescued the dog, took the dog back home. And when they were driving back to the wine tasting, this gentleman said to my friend, how can I really ever repay you? You're so kind. I'm so grateful. And my friend said, "Well, what do you do?" And this gentleman, of course, said, "For the last 35 years, I've been a producer of television series." So, so my friend said, "Well, would you spend some time with my friend from Australia who's written a book series. And I met with this man. I won't mention his name, but his CV. I mean, he's made lots and lots of really well-known TV series. And as it turned out, when I was showing him book one, there's a list in the front of book one of all these visionary people that I would like to honor. And, people like, Nassim and Foster and Victor Schauberger and, Vandana Shiva and all these people. And his uncle, who had recently passed over, was on that list. So, that was he was blown away and obviously wanted to honor his uncle. So, yeah, we formed a really close bond, and now I have a leading advisor in relation to the potential for a TV series. So, again, that's just another example of how the synchronicities keep rolling out. And so anyway, basically, I have this book series which is a fictional story about Australian teenagers as they grow up, but I actually call it faction because it involves real life issues like fracking and water fluoridation and, Nassim's science and so forth. And as it's aimed for teenagers and young adults, but I'm actually getting incredible feedback from older people because I guess they really like the way the issues are seen through the eyes of teenagers and therefore quite simplistically. And so at the end of many of the chapters, there are QR codes which you can scan with your phone and link straight through to my website where there's a discussion of the relevant topic, whether it's Dr. Emoto's work with water or meditation, gratitude, the link between fracking and earthquakes, and very importantly, the Disclosure Project as well. And so what I've done in the past month is I've organized the 120 research links into modules that I call, first of all, I called it some sort of education curriculum. And then I realized it's not about education, it's about empowerment. So what it actually is I call it the youth empowerment messages and exercises. So, for example, the first module is called Your Incredible Potential, and it deals with consciousness and universal order and, various very important subjects. And the outcome of that is to get the reader to ask themselves, what would I do if I knew I couldn't possibly fail? The idea being that they will unlock the gift inside them, that the mainstream education seems to just ignore. Or there's another module dealing with law and governance, and under that outcome, the outcome is that they understand that they are a divine sovereign being with rights under universal law that can't be taken away or granted by the United Nations or whichever man-made body you care to mention. So I'm really pleased with that. Those messages and exercises come with the series, and yeah, it has a really wonderful. It's really wonderful to me when I get a young person in particular who reads it and just contacts me and says, I really resonate with this, and you've encouraged me to, this is what I really want to do, and this is what I'm going to do. So that gives me, an immense amount of joy. So yeah, it's been a very rewarding project, and yeah, it's still going here on Kauai. I've come across a couple of incredible beings, young beings at the gatherings. We've had these sunrise gatherings where elders from around the world have provided blessings and connections with the land of Kauai. And I've just gone up to these kids and, excuse me, I see your light shining. Can I talk to you for a minute? I give them copies of the books, and yeah, they're always very pleased to be recognised, and they always have a great story to tell, and so on. So I think the youth of the world are the key. They are the key to the future, and I'm very happy to say that I believe they vibrate differently to my generation, and yeah, so basically, in summary, my trilogy, which is called It's Our Earth 2, and it's interesting, the initials are IOET, is based on the premise that it's hugely empowering for humans, particularly our youth, to understand that they are part of a living, evolving order connected through energy patterns existing at all levels. Once they understand this, it helps them to see, firstly, that they are the universe expressing itself uniquely, and that's really cool. Secondly, that they are always directly connected with a higher evolving field of intelligence, so they can consciously create the reality they desire. And that's, in a sense, that's what we're doing now. We're re-engineering that field, and I think they can see that it's better for them to do that rather than, say, watching other people's realities on television, which the mainstream encourages them to do through reality TV. And also, very importantly, Andrew, that their existence is not random or meaningless, because there's a higher order in our universe, and therefore they chose to be here. They chose to be here now with whatever gifts or challenges come with their particular, flesh vehicle. And so the challenge is to make the most of that and uncover those gifts through knowing themselves and, discovering who they really are. So that's basically the story. And as I say, that my book series is called It's Our Earth 2. Evolve Smart is something different. That is a consultancy I have that relates to, my idea was to bring my past business experience into the field of helping with ideas and technologies that help the planet. So new energy technologies, for example, technologies to do with structuring water, and so forth. And water has been a really key thing for me, because as I was on my journey of learning the truth, when I discovered, I mean, firstly, I assumed that water fluoridation must be a good thing, because otherwise, the media would say it wasn't. And that was in the early days when I didn't really know anything. And when I did the research and watched some of the documentaries and read some of the books, and in particular, there's an amazing book called The Fluoride Deception by Chris Brystrom, which actually, I mean, this guy is a decorated journalist, and he did 10 years worth of research, including uncovering documents from, I think it was the alumina industry, and showing that, what are we going to do? We've got to get rid of this waste, and, coming up with the idea of putting it in the water. And, I happen to always, I guess, intuitively understand that water is not the inert substance they teach us. It's actually a deity, and it's capable of structuring itself into amazing geometries so that it holds more light. And in that regard, as I was learning that, somebody invited me to a presentation by Dr. Emoto, who was visiting Australia at the time. And when I saw what he was saying, it was like a reinforcement to me, or a proof that my lawyer self required at that stage. And I actually went up and spoke to him afterwards and hugged him. And I've never, at the time, I'd never really felt the energy like his. He was like some kind of angel. And I know he's since passed away, but he's just a wonderful, wonderful man. And he actually also told me it's all about the children, which again ties into my book series. So yeah, that's I guess at least my initial overview, subject to any questions you have.
Yes, I do recall something that you said during the, I think it was your presentation. Correct me
Yep.
if I'm wrong. Something that was very intriguing about how the universe will go to great lengths to make sure that people that it really wants to really sees as a crucial aspect to their agenda, the universe's agenda to spread love and suppress fear. I believe you said you knew someone who was unable to find employment, and the people on welfare that gave him
Oh, yeah.
welfare. Was
Yep,
that you?
yep,
Yeah,
yep.
yeah. And the
Yeah, yeah.
people.
I'll tell that story. That is actually part of the story of the Findhorn Garden. Now, I don't. I'm assuming no one's. I'll just pretend no one knows about Findhorn Garden. It's an incredible story from Scotland, and a man by the name of Peter Caddy and his wife Eileen, and I think they had four sons, and they had another dear friend called Dorothy. Now, all of them were living in a caravan, believe it or not, and Peter Caddy, uh, through their meditations, they had been directed to set up a garden in, I guess, on the coast, sort of near the coast of Scotland, in an area that wouldn't typically be a place that you'd want to set up a garden. The soil was sandy, and the weather was quite extreme. Strong winds and so forth. But they kept getting this message in their meditations to go and set up this garden. And Peter Caddy was actually quite a qualified man. I think he'd had a career in the Air Force, and then he'd managed motels. So he used to take a motel that was run down and turn it around. And, he had a great track record. He was highly employable. And then suddenly it just stopped, and he could not get a job for the life of him. I think that went on for a number of years. It may have even been 4 or 5 years. And he was on welfare, and he was trying to, raise feed his family. And anyway, eventually he got a visit from the welfare department, the UK government, and they had this big thick file on him, and they said, "You are a highly qualified man, and we've just noticed that it's suddenly, it's become impossible for you to get a job over the last 5 years." And he said, "Yeah, yeah, it has." And he was quite a religious man, and they said to him, "Would you say that God is trying to prevent you from getting a job?" And he said, "Yeah, oh, you guys get it. I'm so happy you get it. That's right. God is trying to prevent me from getting a job." And because, he knew that he had this other mission. And then they looked at him and they said, "Would you say that God will provide for your family if we cut you off?" And I guess that was a bit more of a difficult question, but he said, "Honestly, yes, I believe God will provide for my family if you cut me off." And they said, "Good. Well, that's what we're doing. We're cutting you off." So that was it. He was cut off welfare, and virtually straight away, something, I think a book or something that Dorothy had made started selling. And they needed, say, a bag of cement, and a truck would go past and a bag of cement would fall off, and anything they needed just came to them. And basically they were told, they had a ongoing communication with the nature spirits and the devas of the various plants and so forth, and the overlighting devas. And they followed the instructions and created this oasis, which is quite famous today. They produced uh, various vegetables that were way above the average size. And when the experts came to test them and to test the property, they basically said, you could not have done this without chemicals and so forth. But in actual fact, that was the case. It was the wisdom of nature that had, through synchronistic planting and so on, and seeing the garden as light and radiant energy, because that's what the Devas say. If you look at the garden as light and radiant energy, just doing that creates more light. And so they've created this miraculous situation, which I think is a blueprint as part of our future. And it's certainly something I include in my story.
Yeah, well, this story that you've told, this is kind of raises a lot of questions in regards to people that are trying to do their part for the well-being of humanity, and whether they think that they should go through the same, try the same risky thing that this guy did. Well, let me tell you, from my perspective, I had a similar problem myself when let's say I had my awakening maybe like late 2009, early 2010. I was doing all sorts of things, talking about conspiracy theories and spirituality and such, even in my own family, and trying to like put videos on YouTube and such. My father in particular was very bitchy about this, asserting that if I kept doing this, I'd never be able to get a job. Well, I eventually came up to him and I told him, listen, Dad, I've come to the realization employment is enslavement. The purpose of getting a job, well, the reason the powers that be want people to get jobs is to enslave humanity, to keep humanity from waking up. You want me to get a job? Forget it. I'm not going to get one. If I have to sell drugs and live off welfare, then so be it. I'm going to do whatever I can to wake up humanity. And if you're going to have to, and you're going to help me through it, whether you like it or not, you don't have the right to be a slave, Dad. You want to be a slave, so I'm going to wake you up whether you like it or not. He looked at me like, no way, you did not just say that. And, ever since I
Yeah,
told him that, he hasn't bothered me since about my actions,
yeah,
not being able to give me a job. But I made it clear then that I finally got it, and this is something that a lot of people would think, I don't know if I want to do this. I mean, you want to do your part to wake up humanity, but then again, people would be so fearful, dare I say it, of they think if I quit my 9 to 5 job and if I quit welfare, how can I possibly be sure that the universe is going to make sure everything works out well to the point that I get everything that I need? And I mean, they can also try to do meditations like to manifest things with the law of abundance. But even then, people are like, well, how can I be sure that I'll get everything I need and then some, the things that I want and all? I mean, I'm a living proof that it can work. I just had a horoscope a couple days ago where it said, expect some things to deal with money to possibly come to fruition. And next thing I know, I got a check in the mail from some insurance company that apparently thought I was paying too much. And well, I thought, okay, there's definitely truth to astrology in this regard. Here's proof of it. And well, I do a lot of meditations and such to get law of attraction style, and I think it works out. But people will, I must say, be afraid of quitting their day job and trying to wake up humanity and do all the things to spread light and suppress fear. They just can't really get the guts to do that because they think, how do I know the universe is going to provide for me? So can you maybe, well, you've kind of given the reassurance you could, but can you give even more reassurance to people who really want to, quit, dare I say, quit their day job and wake up humanity?
yeah. I can totally identify with what you're saying, Andrew. In my case, I don't know if you have children, but
I
in my
don't.
case, yeah, in my case, it was even different because I was married with 4 children, and looking back, I was never really a materialistic person. So even when I was at Goldman Sachs, I was the boss in Australia of my division, but the other, the stockbrokers and so on, they couldn't really handle. I mean, I drove a Toyota, for example, and they were like, you know, what's going on? Why aren't you driving a good car? So I've never really been materialistic, but obviously I like to look after my family. And the other thing, of course, with me is when I decided I was writing a book series, my kids would say, Dad, don't write a book series. You're so embarrassing. Yeah, just don't do this. So, and this is going to be a little bit of a long-winded answer, so sorry, just bear with me. But so anyway, I originally released the first book, under a different name. So I didn't put it under the name David Still, which is my real name. I put it under the name David Powers. I just came up with a name out of the blue and released it. And not long after that, I was contacted by a lady from just through the website. So there was just a website that said It's Our Earth 2 by David Powers, and she contacted me and said she had a message from Master Kathumi, one of the ascended masters, and she said that the book series has to be in your real name. And of course, because nobody knew it wasn't, apart from my family, I paid attention to that message. So I went and met this lady and spoke to her, and she told me various things. So um, I had to reissue the series. But anyway, that's just a little bit of background. But the other thing with me, not only were my kids kind of thinking I was a little weird, or at least 3 out of the 4 were. My friends, I've got some wonderful friends who used to probably in in various years they would listen to every word I said when it came to giving good stock tips, for example. But then I would start to say things like, "Do you know that we put toxic waste in our water? I mean, we're drinking toxic waste. It dumbs us down, our kids and so forth." And they'd say, "Yeah, yeah, that's really bad." And then I'd say, "Look, it's true." And they just sort of, I guess, humor me. And then the conversation would move on to last night's football match, and they'd start talking about, a penalty or a touchdown that wasn't a touchdown, and they'd start saying, "That's outrageous. What sort of a world do we live in? It's so unfair." And yet the reaction to the water fluoridation was just kind of, "Oh yeah, that's really bad." So obviously my credibility with my friends definitely started to go down, and I definitely, from time to time, would question what I was doing, and I also had some guidance in dreams that I'll mention later if we get time. Um, so I guess a number of listeners might be saying here, well, I'm following this path and I'm trying to be of service, and I don't really feel supported, or I'm living week to week, and it would be really good to have some more money or not have to worry about how I'm going to register my car and so forth. And so yeah, it is definitely difficult sometimes when people are in that position, but with great respect to those people, what some of the more evolved beings would say, and this applies to me as well, because I've definitely had such times when I've been really struggling to get some money, and my wife, for example, is back working full time in a fairly demanding job. Is that usually there might be something that's blocking them, or they might be getting in the way of it. I mean, I've come to the realization with myself, I just have to get out of the way of this project and let it happen, and not let my ego, or not try and control things, or think that I'm really good because I'm doing it, when really it's just coming through me. It's not me at all. So I guess if you're in that situation, just let go and let God, as they say. And I really believe that you will be supported. And in this regard, in California recently, I met a man. I would describe him as an ascended master, and he taught me. He was explaining to me the way he sees things and the way he sees love, and basically, he loves himself. Just constantly loves himself and the Creator, and he says it's like a cup, and the cup is so full of love that I give the overflow to everybody, not just not just like a family member or what he calls special love, but he just has unconditional love for everybody. And as I was hanging out with this guy, I just saw how everything fell into place incredibly well for him. He's a guy though who he's actually a member of a galactic council, but he's the one who chose to embody on Earth. And he just, his whole life, everything's he's had his at the age of 3, he decided that all humans were insane. But anyway, he lives this amazing life. And funnily enough, I just bumped into him on Kauai the other day. And while I was in California hanging out with this guy, and he was in an RV, right? And he needed to get new tires. And he also needed to get to Mount Shasta in a hurry. I mean, typical someone like him, to go to Mount Shasta. And unfortunately, they didn't have the right kind of tires. So this was on a Friday, and I think he had to wait till Monday or Tuesday to get the tires. So he was delayed for 4 or 5 days. And what happened was he got the phone call and he looked at myself and another guy and he said, "Oh, I'm not going to get my tires till Tuesday." And the typical reaction from a human would be, "Oh, I'm really bummed. That sucks." And he looked at us and he said, "This is wonderful news." And he said, "Really? What? Why is that?" And he said, "Because when I get the tires, I'll get 5 extra days wear from them." you know. So, in other words, he just has a complete acceptance of everything, and that's his life accordingly just unfolds in a sort of a dream manner. And we actually went to a bar, and he's not really a guy that drinks a lot of alcohol, and the same with me. I just it doesn't agree with me these days. But our other friend liked to drink, to taste boutique beers. So we went along and we drank a beer, and this man drank his beer, and then he got his glass and he balanced it kind of at a 45-degree angle so that just one tiny part of the glass was touching the bar, and then he just left it like that and said, "Okay, I have to go. See you later." So he he walked off, and there was this glass just sitting there, perfectly balanced, and we were just shaking our heads. So I guess he was in my life to show me about the real nature of love and about the nature of trust, and trusting in the universe. And I'm getting closer to that, but I'm not quite in that situation. But I just have to trust, because of the way, as some of the synchronicities I have told you, they just keep unfolding in my life, and I always manage to get the money to travel where I need to, or pay for the books to get printed and published, and so forth. So it really is amazing. If you can have a bank account with $1 million in it, or you can have a bank account that just gets money in it when you need it. And sometimes actually, when you don't have a lot of money, it makes you connect better with other people. That's the other thing. Certainly in my case, when I was wealthy, if someone had a problem, I just used to write them a check. Yeah, here's $10,000. But in a way, that's just saying, go away. Whereas now I'm like, sure, I'll help you move. I'll help you carry your furniture, or, I'll help you go and look for a new car, or whatever. So yeah, many humans do have um, this balance between, yeah, getting their needs met and doing what they want to do. And of course, as corporations drain more and more money from the system every year, which they must do to keep growing their profits, in many ways, it's getting harder. In our grandparents' times, again, I'm just generalizing, but in the general middle class situation, one parent could comfortably work and pay off a house, and usually the father, I guess, but not always. And today you have both parents working, and usually constantly struggling to keep your head above water. So clearly, we just have to step back and look at this and say, what's wrong with this picture? And this is where the next generation comes in, because I think they're quite different, and they're not really buying into the materialistic model as much, and they're not so much having the dream to own their house and so forth. And they seem to be really well guided on their path and really well supported. And recently, I mentioned I had this call from this lady in Colorado, and I actually drove from California to Colorado, which was an awesome experience, by the way. You guys have an incredible, beautiful country that I love dearly, and certainly seem to have memories of being in various places in the past. So I went to Colorado, and she helped me sort of think about my education curriculum. And when I was there, I was in this cafe in a place called Walsenburg, Colorado, which incidentally on they have these T-shirts that say serendipity on the front. So I'm sitting in this cafe, and suddenly I get this intuition to send a text message to a dear friend on Kauai, and I sent her a message saying, I have no plans to come to Kauai, but I just wanted to tell you that you came into my thoughts, and I love you, and you're awesome, and so forth. Sorry, it just makes me cry when I say that for some reason, because this series is channeled through my heart. So sometimes I just start crying. But anyway, I sent her this really beautiful message and said all the best, and she rang me straight away and said, David, we're putting together a gathering of indigenous elders, coming to Kauai, and it's exactly what you wrote in your second book. You have to be here. So so that was it. I just said, great, that's amazing. So I booked a ticket to Kauai, and here I am. And again, it was just because something or some part of me just told me to contact her. So, I really do believe that the rewards are there if you trust. And some people struggle to do this. It's not really the linear thinking, the causation that we've been taught. It's a more of a synchronistic present moment type situation. But the more of us that move into that, we're opening the way for others to do the same. So I commend you, Andrew, with your what you've done with your trusting in your path and following your radio show. And as I told you, I thought this call was an hour earlier, so I went on and had a look at the materials you have, and you've just got some amazing content. And I listened to an interview with a guy called Fred Graves, and I just love that guy. So I got some sort of connection with him, and I'm going to follow up with him at some stage. So that's a separate subject. But
Yeah, I interviewed him, as a matter of fact.
yeah. So thank you. That's what I'm saying. I saw your interview, or I heard your interview, and that was really wonderful. So thanks for all that you're doing. And in my case, I have resisted. I have gone into my ego. Like, hey, I'm an investment banker. Like I'm a lawyer. Like this is kind of weird writing a book, about hippie stuff. And so what happened in my case, I started getting the same dream every night. And I think you'll remember one of the presenters at Sedona was an amazing man, the 21st Tolek King or something. John, I can't remember his surname, and I'm not being disrespectful in any way, because he was just a truly amazing being. And he stood up and sort of said how he every night he just dreams the life he wants, and then the next day whatever he dreamt happens. And he's been doing this since the age of 3. His father taught him, and his father's father, they've been doing it for generations. And obviously people like me and many listeners weren't taught that. So it's a little bit more of a struggle for us. And I don't know if you remember, but I even said in my presentation that I can imagine my guides must be looking at his, talking to his guides saying, you're lucky to have John, our guy David, he sucks. We have to give him the same message, over and over and over before he gets it. And a classic example was the dream. I kept having the same dream, literally every night for a month. And eventually I thought, maybe there's a message here that in this dream. And what the dream was is that I was on a plane, and everybody on the plane was watching the in-flight movie. And they had their headphones on, and they were really riveted by this movie. They fully paying attention to the movie. And it was a movie about a plane crash, and they were watching it, and I realized that our plane was crashing, something had happened to the pilot or whatever. And so I was trying to run around telling everybody, quick, stop watching the movie, the plane's crashing. Well, not that I know what we would have actually been able to do about it, but anyway, they just kept ignoring me. And I was saying, come on, get your headphones off. And then I started having the same dream on a train. So we're in the underground subway system and the train's going out of control. And again, everybody on this, in my dreams anyway, trains had, in-flight entertainment. They're all watching the movie about a train crash. And I'm trying to wake them up. And what I realized, the message was that we are being entertained by our own demise. In other words, a lot of the entertainment that Hollywood puts out is kind of where we're going if the current trend continues, such as, for example, that movie, The Hunger Games, which was something I was grappling with at the time because a journalist friend of mine had, I think, somewhat, he was taking pleasure in sort of telling me, if you're writing a book about peace and love, you got to watch what the teenagers are watching, because they're into this thing called the Hunger Games. And when I read it, I read the book, I was just shocked, about how horrific it was. But and I realized that that's the message in the dream. Anyway, we're being entertained by our own demise, and so I felt that what I was doing was a way to show that to people. But, provided they liked my story, they liked my characters, then they would get this message. And another time when I was kind of, questioning what I was doing, I had a dream that I was surfing in South Africa. And, I'm quite a keen surfer. I love surfing. So I'm out surfing at this break in South Africa. And suddenly the hairs on the back of my neck just stood up, and I said to myself, go to the shore. So I went straight in, and I walked up the stairs and, walked up the track, and there was some guys standing there, and they said, wow, that was good timing. And we looked down, and there was a great white shark swimming through the break, exactly where I was. So the message to me was, trust your intuition. It will serve you well. So if people are having a struggle or whatever, that I guess you just got to keep walking the middle path and try and ask for guidance, ask your higher self, I'm trying to be on this path of service. Is this, what's the lesson I need to create more abundance or, more ease within my life? And often there will be something blocking it from you, because I'm an expert in that situation, trust me. So yeah, it's a really interesting process. And I just want to mention one other thing quickly. This journalist friend of mine, he was a mainstream journalist. So we used to have these off the record discussions about different topics. And when you first learn this information, you try and convince people, you try and tell everyone, hang on, water fluoridation and fracking and so forth. And I was trying to convince this guy about extraterrestrials being real. And he kept on saying, there's no evidence of extraterrestrials, there's no such thing, etc. And, intellectually, I'd done a lot of research and I knew that wasn't the case, but intuitively, in any way, I certainly knew it wasn't the case. And I found his attitude a little bit offensive. So when I heard about the disclosure at the National Press Club by the Army, Air Force, Navy officers, men and women who had extraterrestrial contact in some way whilst on duty, and they were always told, this didn't happen. You're not allowed to discuss this with anybody. We're give us the videotape and so on. And they carried this information, and eventually they had very bravely decided to come out and say, look, we are prepared to testify before Congress that this is what happened. And, there was a lot of them. There was like 100 or so. So I thought, hooray, this is it. I've got him this time. So I rang him up and said, look, I'm just sending you a link to this amazing disclosure that these really brave people have done, bless them. And I told him, I explained the situation, and he said, well, that's not evidence. I said, well, hang on a minute. We convict people of murder based on sworn testimony. these people are offering to swear before Congress, and there's, there's many of them. So in lawyer talk, they are corroborating each other's testimony. And I can't remember, but I said something like that. This is, throughout the 70s and 80s or the 60s or whatever time period it was. And his response to me was, well, there was a lot of acid around during the 60s and 70s. So, in other words, he was saying that every one of those Army, Air Force, and Navy officers were on acid and thought they saw a UFO when they didn't really. And that, bless him for being such a wonderful teacher. He taught me that it's kind of a matter of frequency, and there are some things that some people just won't. They can't possibly believe it. It's just not in their frequency. So if a UFO landed on his head, he wouldn't see it, and that's what I've come to realize. So I'm just putting my information, my story out there for whoever it's meant to reach, but I'm not attached to people like him reading it and awakening, because everybody has their own sacred journey.
Right, but that thing about disclosure. Now, this is interesting. I just watched a video yesterday from Cobra, who runs the website 28portal.blogspot.com. He talked about disclosure of a sort happening in 2018 regarding documents being released, but disclosure of the really, really far out variety where the ETs actually show themselves and say, yeah, we were here all along, we were watching you, the ancient astronauts theorists were right, the UFO hunters were all right, the government was hiding this from you, your ancestors of the past weren't touched with us, yeah, we are here, you have no choice but to acknowledge it because here we are. That kind of disclosure is not supposed to happen, and this is me talking, this is Brad Johnson, who channels the entity Adronis, talking. Adronis said, based on the frequency of Earth and the way it's rising, the rate it's rising, and everybody's consciousness rising, it will not be, and God, I hope he's wrong, but the year 2050, when the ETs finally reveal themselves in our face and say, now you have no choice but to believe that we exist. But, okay, well, hopefully it won't be that long. I do hope people will hear that and be inspired to speed up the process somehow, some way. But in regards to this kind of disclosure that Cobra was talking about, where declassified documents come out that hint, okay, yeah, there is definitely something to the cover-up, and many of those have been disclosed. The problem is the only place they're being disclosed is on alternative media sites and YouTube, and for whatever the reason, humans will not acknowledge something is true unless the government or the media, mainstream media, acknowledges it, which is flat out ridiculous considering the government and the mainstream media lie some more, and lie even when telling the truth would do it good, but that's the way it is. So what kind of disclosure do you think could possibly happen next year, and do you see any light at the end of the tunnel in regards to maybe sooner than 2050 the ETs will come in our face and say, yeah, we're here, you have no choice but to believe us, believe that we're here?
Um, that's a great question, Andrew. It really is, and I guess, I mean, I'm part of a group that of that are involved in contact with, or at least receiving messages from Arcturian beings, and we've even had exercise. It's meant to be to teach people to be ready for disclosure, and we've even sort of done some exercises about what will happen when the ships land, and it's been a really interesting exercises. So obviously, the people doing that believe that the disclosure is imminent. I have no idea really what is going to happen, but one thing that I've definitely been told is that time is so different for them. They say something. I think it was Alexander Midors of Galactic. She's got the
Alexandra
date.
Meadors. Yeah, I
Meadows,
interviewed her.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. She was in Australia and recently, and she was really awesome, along with a number of other people. But she was saying that time is so different for them that they think something's going to happen tomorrow, but in our time, it's quite a lot of years. So my own personal situation is not to be particularly attached, like as if, I can't wait till disclosure happens because that's going to change my life. I'm just trying to encourage people and certainly to take the messages of some of the transmissions, which are just all about love and, sovereignty of each being and so forth, and just to live that. But when will the actual disclosure happen? Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. And we've been hearing this. I've certainly been told that it's imminent, but what does that mean? I really don't know. So it's a great question, and I've learned just to not be too, don't be too attached to the outcome. But just in that regard, I'll just mention when I went to the Sedona conference, I I formed an intention. I was invited by a guy called Rick Nelson to his paranormal group in Colorado, and he's an amazing man. And I looked at his the presentations, and I came across an interview of him by a guy called Don Daniels, who's a pilot, who's an ET contactee and so forth. And I made an intention to connect with Don Daniels, right, during my American trip. So anyway, as you remember, on the Saturday morning, grandmother Star Laughing Fox of the Cherokee Nation, bless her, had us outside doing all sorts of wonderful welcome and gratitude exercises to the Mother Earth and so forth. And then after a while, we were all just kind of had this really ecstatic high, and she said, "Right now, it's time to hug people." So I turned around and hugged this man, and just after I hugged him, I looked at his name tag, and that was Don Daniels. So it's quite easy for me to connect with him. And I found his book amazing about his contact experiences, and that's part of the recommended reading in my youth empowerment materials. Look, I just think whether or not they actually land, they contain incredibly positive experiences. And certainly I know I know many contactees who are in constant contact, and they take a different message from the one that Brad that you mentioned. So they think it's far more imminent. But me personally, I have no real idea.
Another thing that people are thinking is imminent, but seems to be postponing over and over, and it's driving people nuts, including me. And well, you mentioned about
Fine.
Sedona. There's another conference. Well, not a conference, just an event that Suzanne Ross. She made a video, and she said that some guy who is really in on the really deep ends of this thing is going to be holding a conference to try to get out some of the facts of, like, okay, the wait is over or going to be over soon. We're going to be, here are some of the things that are progressing, and here's the level we're at, and here's when, and the dreaded time word when it's going to happen. I am talking about the GCR, Nasara, RV, whatever you want to
Yep.
call it, global currency reset thing. And now this thing has been driving people nuts because we hear about there's going to be some sort of a reset happening soon, and maybe after 10 to 12 years of gold-backed currency, we'll eventually be able to transition to no money at all. But here's the problem. As long as we have the banks loaning the people in the government's money that doesn't exist and charging interest on the loans, we're slaves, because that kind of system makes debt and inflation unavoidable. And Cliff Hyde, the Webbot guy, he said maybe about a year ago, based on his WebBot statistics and such, sometime in the fall of 2017, America was looking at hyperinflation, and Bill Bonner was talking about the credit bubble, the credit card bubble, eventually bursting around that same time period. Now, we are in that time period now. In the northern hemisphere, the fall of 2017, and nothing is happening. And it's kind of making you wonder if the powers that be are doing something that's manipulating the markets to prevent those predictions from coming to fruition, to keep us off that timeline. and James Gilliland, he couldn't help but laugh it off, and some people are laughing off too. When it's like, when's RV? It's next Tuesday. When's Nassar? It's next Tuesday, and it's becoming an annoying running gag now. And he did say that some of the people who are trying to make it happen literally dragged some of the bankers. And powers that be out into the like a parking lot and held a gun to their head and said, "Let us make RV happen, or we'll blow your brains out." Is that understood? And well, okay, so why are we so slaves to the dollar? And another question about this is, how are we going to transition? I frankly, to be honest with you, it would be really nice, I think, to just crash the dollar all at once and have America go through the same problems as Venezuela and Zimbabwe. We need like a so-called Nibiru event to give humanity the nice kick in the pants that it needs for being slaves to a system too long like this. And it would be nice if we could just do that. But the problem is, these people that are trying to do the RV, they don't want it to be like that. They actually want it to be more smooth, calm, and gradual, and be like a nice transition where America doesn't have to go through Weimar Republic type inflation. And well, I'm thinking, well, okay, that's all well and good, but does that mean I'm going to be a senior citizen by the time RV happens? And I don't want that, because then, well, I'll be retired on so many other people, and, well, it's just going to be a waste. So this event that Suzanne Ross is talking about, where this guy is going to be talking about, I don't know what he's going to be talking about, and I hope he's not getting information from sources that are designed to give out disinfo. But you're really big on the humanity evolving and Earth becoming a better place to be, and I'm sure that you've looked into this yourself. Can you offer any good light at the end of the tunnel in regards to what you see for the sake of us stop being slaves to a money-based system that makes debt and inflation unavoidable?
Yeah, sure, Andrew. Yeah, I agree with everything you just said, and if you take Nasara law, for example, there's also the question of how you implement it, because I think if you just start giving everyone in the world $10 million, it's not going to be constructive, as opposed to providing funding for what I call transitional investments and things that actually have a transformative effect that change the way we do things, rather than everyone just going and buying a new Porsche, for example. So I think about this a lot, and I've actually been contacted to play a role in this. There's another organisation called the Kingdom of Mana, who it's actually a nation in the Pacific, and they're talking about the gold, a lot of gold being released by the Asian families. I don't know the full story, but certainly they're talking about huge amounts of humanitarian money, coming any day. And I've been offered to be part of the executive team for that. And they are really, really good-hearted people, and who certainly believe the truth of what they're saying. But it does get back to this timing issue, because, for example, on one of the calls that we had about the disclosure and practicing for when the ships land, one of the guys in the group, this was back in June, and he said, "I know for a fact that the reset is happening on 21 June 2017. So I don't have much debt or something. So I'm going out and borrowing as much money as I can on on credit cards." And I didn't really feel like saying anything. That would be a bit of a party pooper. But I thought to myself, I wonder how that's going to look for you in July and August and September, and now then October and then November. So yeah, it's kind of the same as the disclosure thing. And what happens, Andrew, as you know, when you're waiting for something to happen, such as the currency reset, or the Nasara law, or the Kingdom of Mana, if it hasn't happened, it's very easy to be in judgment of that. And when you are in judgment of that, you kind of push it away. So I've heard the stories as well about people being taken into the car park. I've heard the stories about trying to release the funds, and the funds being stolen and blocked and so on. And yeah, again, who knows? Being involved as an executive to hand out, the abundance or to channel the abundance to great projects and so forth to help people give their gifts to humanity and help humanity prosper. I mean, that would be my dream. But in the meantime, I'm just going on with my book series and helping the young ones. And then when that does happen, and I believe it will eventually happen, that'll be, a win-win situation. But yeah, I've just learned, and friends of mine have been saying, like, people have been saying this is going to happen for 20 years, and in my case, for example, it's probably helped me out in a way, because when I lost a lot, basically lost a lot of money in 2009, for example, 2008, I could have easily, just traded my way back to, being wealthy, but I just thought the system was going to crash. So I didn't do that. And, we've been waiting for the crash, telling people buy gold or whatever, and it just keeps on not happening. And the way some of the people on the inside describe it to me is that the head of the snake has been cut off, but the body is still there. So you still have all these bankers, such as the one that was taken out into the car park, who still, have their allegiance to blocking things and stealing the money and so forth. But their big brother, whatever, isn't supporting them anymore, but they're still in their position of power, but it's just gradually being unwound. But yeah, I mean, obviously I would love, the sooner the better, for that to happen. And I am seeing some people, this is not an institutionalized thing, but certainly some very wealthy people are coming forward and backing some amazing projects. And, but yeah, I'm not going to say that, Nassara is going to happen next week or anything like that, because I don't know. And I'll be super interested to hear from the conference you attend and to see what the information is.
Well, I'm not going to that one in Sedona that Suzanne Ross is going to do. I
Okay.
just said she just brought it up that some guy's going to have a meeting there of a sort. Not really a conference, but I think just like a one-day meeting or something to talk about this. I don't know what Chief Golden Light Eagle's planning so much in regards to any information about this at the 11/11 conference in Southern California. But all right, we got about 27 minutes to go on the show, so I'm looking at the little picture here on your website, evolvesmart.com, with the Earth and all the circles around it. I guess we'll take each circle one by one here, and I'll give you the chance to talk about each one.
Yeah,
What?
I was just going to say, I've got another website. You're probably working off my bio that Tolek produced, but can I just give you my other website to do with my book series? It's called, www dot, I should just put it on your Skype, actually. It's Our Earth 2. So ITSOUR,
Okay.
yeah, TOO.com. And that will give you, the book website. And
I see that. Okay, it's Earth Youth Gathering. Yeah.
And
so of all ages.
Yeah. So if you scroll down, it shows you my research links, for example. I'm happy to talk about the Evolve Smart stuff, by the way. But how do I? I'll just give you this other link to my Amazon page. So in my situation, I'm ready, willing, and able to assist and with the financial stuff. And but like I say, just to the very, very short term now, my focus is on my book series, because I truly believe that we are engineering the field of human consciousness, and the way to do this is with the youth, and there will be a spontaneous awakening. And interestingly, Andrew, this is what the elders are saying. The elders have, this past week on Kauai, come from all around the world and delivered a message that basically says Mother Earth is very sick. She has a very severe virus, and that severe virus is humanity. And basically, we've run out of time, and we just have to move straight into our hearts and just be present and each listen to our own guidance. and get out of our heads and get into our hearts. And in fact, what they're saying is the most unselfish thing any person can do right now is heal themselves, because what is inside you is what is presents outside you. And I can't wait to see this documentary, because the just being part of the ceremony and hearing the wisdom from people from, Colombia, Alaska, the Hopi Nation. Mona, one of the 13 grandmothers, was here. Kalahari Bushmen. It's really interesting. They're all saying the same thing, and of course they all have very strong galactic connections. So I mean, how come they've all got flying saucers drawn on their caves? I mean, in those days it wasn't as if they Googled it and saw it, but they've all got the same the same message. So obviously that is great evidence of our galactic star cousins as well.
Yes, yes. All right. Do want to cover these things on this Voss Smart page. You talked a
Sure,
little bit
sure.
about the water and all. So let's go to all right, how about
Yeah.
science reform and education? Now this is a big one because people are debating how's the best way to go about this, because the science that we see in the textbooks, for all intents and purposes, it's a religion. It tells a lot of truth, but it doesn't tell the whole entire story. And there's different points of view in a lot of the science things. And I mean, some of the science is flat out bullcrap, like astronomy to a great extent. A lot of things they tell us in astronomy are misleading. I could go on and on about that, but which sciences do we need to, I guess, really look into, and how do we get this, like, change the physics textbooks into metaphysics textbooks, if you will? And also in regards to education, is a classroom setting like a good way for children to learn things? I mean, the school system as we have it is left brain, closed minded indoctrination, but I mean, some people like David Icke have said children should be out playing in nature, not being in a classroom for 8 hours a day. Well, going out and playing in nature, it's great and all, but I mean, they're going to be ignorant of how reality works if they're just being out in nature playing all the time. Isn't it in your best interest to maybe have them learn something? And that's where
I,
maybe homeschooling comes in. But then again, if you're going to have a classroom, what should the subjects be if it's not going to be the stuff that it is in school? I know you wanted to talk, so I just wanted to get this out. But what do you have to say, and what answers do you possibly have to my questions here?
yeah. Well, maybe we'll start first with education. Um, yeah, on my website, there's a great clip on my the other one by it's called "Don't Stay in School," and it's by this guy. He's called Boy in a Band, and he's got long red hair, and at the time he got dyed red hair. He got like something like 10 million views on YouTube, I think, and he was a lot of people are really interested in this, and he was kind of saying that you know what they don't really teach the kids the stuff they need to know. And some people, many people wrote in and said, we agree with you, but other people said, you just Google it. But of course, you don't know what you need to know. So, and people, if our kids are going to be spending 10 or 8 hours a day in a classroom, we need to make it as productive as possible. Now, one of the things about the classroom environment is that often a school situation, it's like a survival situation. People don't want to get bullied, they don't want to get hassled. So if you imagine a flower, it's like they close up, like just like the flower closes up, so their antenna shuts down. So I totally believe it's not a good learning environment at the moment. And I agree with David Icke that when you are out in nature, what the elders say is, instead of this kind of just learning with your mind, you take everything in with all your senses. And so this Alaskan elder, for example, who was taught that way, he went on to do university degrees. He's very academically well performed as well, because he understands to tap into the energy of something and to look at the big picture. And I believe that in Finland, for example, they have a situation where the kids call the teachers by their first name rather than, sir, and they don't have homework, and they outperform academically. They perform really well. So I totally agree that the education system needs to be reformed. And in some ways, my book series is a little bit like a parody because it probably takes things to the extreme. But what I call it is, in the future, it's called the School of Joy, where you know yourself and you learn what you want to learn, that what gives you joy, and you volunteer to help and participate. Why do we need to learn mathematics, for example, as opposed to learning about energy? Why don't we learn about permaculture in school? I had a kid contact me recently. He'd been through the school system and he was actually on the verge of being suicidal. And then he found out about permaculture, and he found out that it is possible to grow food in a way that, keeps improving. If you work with nature, it keeps providing. And he said, I actually thought the world was effed, but now I have hope. So I think we need to teach the kids things that empower them, things that give them hope for the future. We teach our kids that the world's going to run out of food and everyone's going to starve, So if we teach them that they can get the answers by tapping into nature, by meditating, through silence, rather than, the monkey mind being so busy that their bandwidth is all taken up. My name is David Still, but nobody taught me to still my mind. My mind was going at 100 miles an hour constantly. And I have learned that, you can learn a lot more in a favorable environment where the kids feel safe and where the kids are asked to question things, not just to accept everything they're told, but to question things. Ultimately, I believe that would be a much better way to teach them. And certainly I'm seeing some amazing young beings who are homeschooled, and, bless those parents who have the opportunity to do that, because not everybody does. And that's why we need to improve the actual education system. Some people say it's up to the parents, but what about kids who don't have parents? That's pretty unfair for them, isn't it? So I definitely agree. We totally have to recreate our education model. And, that's a pretty sensitive subject for me because my eldest my eldest daughter has just qualified as a teacher. So what I say about that doesn't really, isn't a really great thing for my relationship there, unfortunately. But that's her journey, and that's, I just have to stick to my beliefs. And totally, this is what the indigenous people are saying, that the school system. People say the school system we have at the moment is just designed to make, willing workers and willing consumers who don't question anything. And there's a guy called John Gatto who is I think he won the New York Teacher of the Year twice in a row. And the second time he won it, he used the opportunity to resign because he said the system is terrible. And he's written a number of books about this, and he puts forward amazing arguments about how bad the system was. And my view, I didn't know any of this, Andrew, because I was good at mathematics and I could regurgitate things like a robot. But if you look at John Gatto's work, he gives great. He actually says the system is deliberately designed to create disempowered students and therefore disempowered adults. So education reform to me is at the very top of the list, definitely. And as I say, if you look, I've got some links on that I can post on your Facebook if you like, that people can follow up. As far as science goes, science is we're stuck in the reductionist model of science where people only look at what they can measure, and they think that something can be understood just simply by taking it apart. They just ignore sort of energy. And this reductionist science is extremely limiting. If you take physics, for example, the mainstream physics, I believe, there's definitely some very, very smart people working on physics, but I totally felt that particle physics, for example, is just basically a load of crap. And then when I was thinking that, I came across a book by a guy called Alexander Unzicker, which is actually, if you scroll down my page, it's there. It's called The Higgs Fake. And Alexander Unzicker is an award-winning author, and he basically gives a scathing, absolutely scathing criticism of mainstream science, mainstream physics. And one of the things in particular he says is that mainstream physics, it uses a thing called strong force to basically, the reason why two protons, for example, don't repel each other. Now they should, there's some sort of force keeping them together because the two positives should repel. And in terms of physics, that force is something, it's 10 with 39 zeros. So it's an incredible strong force. And they get rid of strong force by a rounding error. They treat it as a rounding error, basically. So what it's explained very clearly in Dr. Unzicker's work, which I recommend, and Nassim Haramein's work actually solves the strong force. So it gets rid of the need for the strong force. So this is one of the things science needs. Why aren't more people looking at Nassim's work? I mean, if he has in fact solved the greatest problem in physics today, which I believe to be true, why aren't people looking at that? Why aren't the educational institutions looking at that? And one reason is because his work isn't through those educational institutions. And it's a bit like, Galileo with the Catholic Church. They don't want to admit that they were wrong, or, that they're not, the be all and end all of science. So we need to have independent science. Science at the moment is controlled by funding. And, with Nassim, for example, scientists contact him, and say, we love your work, but we can't say that in public because we'll lose our funding. So people who fund the majority of the science, I don't think they want energy healing to take off. I don't think they want unified physics to take off because these are very empowering things and they're bad for business.
No question. Nikola Tesla could tell you all that if he was still around. By the way, what that cockadoodle doing in the background, is that an actual rooster?
Yeah, here on Kauai, beautiful island of Kauai, there's a lot of chickens running around,
Mhm.
and from what I can see, they're extremely happy. Notwithstanding, a businessman in Australia once tried to convince me that chickens would much rather be squashed on top of each other in cages. He was obviously a chicken poultry farmer. And yeah, I once, as a satire, I did an interview with a chicken here on Kauai, and I asked it if it would rather be stuck in a cage, and it seemed like it preferred to just run around gleefully, having the time of its life. So it's interesting what people can convince themselves to believe what they're doing is the right thing if they want to.
Mm,
So, but yeah, it's chickens and roosters.
chickens.
Yep.
Chicken is like, for all intents and purposes, the only meat that I eat still. I always say I'll never be able to give up eating meat entirely. My meat eating habits will go down, 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 but never actually reach zero. And I said turkey and chicken are now the only meats that I eat. Well, now I'm not going to buy turkey anymore, except for Thanksgiving, of course, and occasionally once a week I go to the pizza place and have pepperoni and ham. So that's the once a week, the pig stuff. But the only meat I buy from Whole Foods, which is going to start buying now, is chicken. So I'm getting there in regards to trying to become the natural herbivore that many humans are supposed to be. And since I mentioned that, like sustainability and nature and human health and all that, I guess I'll ask you about this. Is it
Oh,
really in humanity's best interest to become herbivores and stop being omnivore-like? And if it is, Is it a good idea to become vegan? Because some of the dairy foods like milk and cheese, some programs have come out saying that milk really isn't all as cracked up as we've been led to believe it is. It doesn't really do a body good, and there's better ways to get calcium, like leafy green vegetables. And eggs are very controversial. All that stuff about eggs causing heart attacks and strokes is a lie, because all the cholesterol in eggs is 100% good cholesterol, the HDL variety. But still, people assert that because eggs come from an animal, it's not in our best interest to eat them. So, to be vegetarian or not, and to be vegan or not, what's your take on this?
Yeah, yeah, good question. And I took from your interview with Fred Graves that you're a pizza lover, because I think you just come on the radio and said you'd had a nice pizza. If you click on human health, funnily enough, I just clicked on the page that said human health while you were saying this, which talks about we're actually beings of light. So, why don't we act like it? But the thing about, take the beef situation, the what influences me is the footprint of the beef industry, the destruction of the Amazon rainforests, for example, and the way that we treat our cows. We over the years, I mean, in history, we've in other cultures we worshipped cows, and now we're treating cows and chickens. We're farming souls. The amount of, for example, chicken wings for the Super Bowl, I thought it was something like 1 billion or something. So just think, we're farming all those chickens just for that. So that's not so much saying beef is bad for you per se, but I believe the beef industry is, out of sort of integrity. Hope I don't get fined for saying that, because I understand in the US anyone who criticizes the beef industry can get fined. But yeah, it's the way we produce it, the industrialized production. It has an enormous footprint. And if you look at, if I don't know if you've ever heard of a documentary called Cowspiracy, it's really interesting, because there's a lot of research that's been done that shows that the carbon footprint of the beef industry and industrialized farming is, almost as bad, if not as bad, as the fossil fuel industry. And yet nobody's really looking. There's some amazing people putting information out, but as a society, don't seem to be really questioning collectively how we grow our food and what the footprint of that is. And to me, that's quite surprising, because I think it's a lot easier to change the way we produce our food, because it's a seasonal thing, as opposed to, fossil fuels, which are a little bit more entrenched. So, personally, if you look at movies like Forks Over Knives, there's great evidence that a plant-based diet is much healthier. And this is in that particular documentary, which is in one of the links in my book series. It shows two doctors. One of them was one of the head cancer surgeons under Richard Nixon when he had the war on cancer. And he said, well, hang on, I'm just cutting people open once they have heart problems. I'd rather prevent the heart problems. This guy grew up on a dairy farm, and he has come out very, very strongly over the decades in favor of a plant-based diet. And he has healed many people who have been told by their doctors they're going to die. And why would he do that? I mean, he was a surgeon earning lots of money, and he's devoted his life to this. And they did a thing called the China study, which is also mentioned in my first book, that in China, the premier, I guess, I can't remember the title, but the head of China got cancer, and he wanted, as his legacy, he wanted his people to get an understanding of cancer. So they did, the most enormous study that's ever been done, and it showed statistically a very large number of correlations to plant-based diets being healthy and non-plant-based diets being not as healthy. So I believe there's a great deal of evidence, both from the point of human health and also from the perspective of resource utilization, that the world, would be much better off if everybody was vegan, and also that relates to the amount of water usage. Growing beef, for example, is very concentrated. It uses a lot of resources, many pounds of grain and many gallons of water to produce, a pound of steak. So that's really my reasoning there about that. The other thing that's really interesting, and again, this was a synchronicity for me. When I was staying in California, I met this man, and he is a world innovator in spirulina microfarms, and he's written 3 books, and I'll put a link to that on your site. I can't remember his surname just off the top of my head. His name is Robert. He's a very, very wise man, and the highest protein content per acre is spirulina. It's not beef, and it's not chicken. So we get taught that if you don't eat meat, you're going to be a puny weakling, and or you're going to be sick. And one of the links in my book series shows a UFC fighter who is a vegan. And so I thought that would be pretty cool for the teenagers to see, because he said, I'm not really doing this to change the world. I just personally find that since I switched to being a vegan, I have much more energy. And if I do get injured, I heal much more quickly. And this guy is really cool. He, after he switched to being a vegan, I think he won 15 of his fights in a row. So, and trust me, you look at this movie, he's not a weakling. So that's the sort of thing I want the youth to see. But what I say to the young people, Andrew, is you have to learn to make up your own mind. Don't just take my word for it. And that even goes for disclosure and everything else. You make up your mind and you decide. I'm just giving you some resources that that you aren't being shown, that I think are highly relevant to you informing yourself and deciding what works best for you.
Yeah, so, I unfortunately lost a friend who became a vegan. Now, I didn't he didn't ditch me because I chose not to become a vegan. I ditched him because he became such a jerk after becoming a vegan. He started discriminating against anybody who had animal products, and my horoscope that day, I remember it said a pink elephant in the room will come to your awareness. And for the past year or so, I hadn't really met this guy in person, but I communicated with him over the phone, and he seemed to be turning into more and more of a jerk every day. And then I finally got to meet him in person, and the pink elephant in the room, I think, was the fact that I had to ditch him because he wouldn't be able to get along with me. Now, he's just a rare bad apple, I think. But you say there's a lot of people that are vegans who are definitely doing the best for humanity. And well, I don't know. I mean, I just ate 6 eggs before this interview here. I kind of had to eat them because they were going to go expire in a couple of days. I'm going to be going to California, of course. So and eggs, got a lot of nutrients in them. But then again, all the vegans out there, they're gonna say it's not in your best interest to eat it. So I don't know. So,
I think it's very important to not be in judgment, and I certainly don't. I think it's up to each person to do their own thing, and my approach is more on the collective. I think it's indisputable that more resources would be available if everybody was vegan. If anyone's got any, suggestions to the contrary and they're not paid for by the meat industry, I'd be very interested to hear that. But there was a guy that I knew, and he was vegan, and he was so militant about his broccoli and everyone should eat broccoli and this and that. He was so stressed about it, he got cancer, or he got, I can't remember, but he got some sort of disease and died. So, if you're eating good food, but you're judging everybody else, a judgment of somebody else is really a judgment of yourself. That's going to pollute you from the inside out. So I certainly don't judge anybody. And if I go to someone's house and they're serving meat, well, I will eat the meat with gratitude and, participate in the meal. It's not for me to judge other people. And, but as a habit, I don't buy it myself. But yeah, we don't need to judge each other, and each person just needs to do what they feel is best.
Mm.
But like I say, I'll put some of that information on your site, on your Facebook page, if you like, Andrew, because it is pretty interesting information. Hello?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute. I didn't realize it.
Oh.
Okay, we're back here. So, okay, yes, it is 8 o'clock here in the Eastern Time Zone. I guess we'll bring this interview to an end now. Very fascinating to say the least. I'll give you a couple minutes right now. Take 2 minutes or so. Get at anything that you like. Contact info again if you want to do that, and what you're doing for the future, what you see for the future, and then we'll call it a day. So, your final words.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. I really appreciate this opportunity. As I say, this book series that I've written contains all of this information and much more wrapped up into a story. The idea is not so much to get a lot of facts and figures, but to get an understanding of the way natural systems work and the way energy works and the ability to, work things out for yourself. And I think that's extremely important. The third book is coming out shortly. Foster Gamble's just writing the foreword, so I'm really excited about that. It's called The Dream World. It'll be out before Christmas. The trilogy is called It's Our Earth 2, and the website is www.itsourEarth2. So ITSOUREARTHTOO.com, and the books are available on Amazon. And yeah, please spread the word because it's self-published. It's very difficult to get a mainstream publisher to publish something that's completely critical on the system. And, I think this is very important information. I get great feedback from people. So please take the time to have a look. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for coming on. It was a fascinating interview to say the least. So, enjoy the rest of your check then from the consciousness. I bid you aloha. Well, you're Australian, but you're in Hawaii, so I can say that. So it means hello and goodbye in Hawaiian talk. So enjoy it.
Exactly.
Yeah, enjoy everything.
Hello.
Good luck. Enjoy
Thank
everything.
you.
Good luck.